So, this aircraft is the answer to the question of what does a 5-year-old draw when they are picturing a fast jet aircraft. The Vigilante is probably one of the most gorgeous aircraft ever conceived, and it's also probably one of the heaviest to ever operate from a carrier flight deck. And it's conceived for a role which makes it an attack aircraft. It's conceived as a strategic bomber. It actually finds fame and utility as a reconnaissance aircraft, providing a capability which has honestly never been properly replaced in the US Navy. Because it's tactical, medium level reconnaissance. It's the kind of information gathering you need on the fly. It's what you need when you need it right now. There's persistent monitoring, which can be achieved with drones. There is overview and overwatch, which can be achieved with satellites. That middle level, we often these days use fighter aircraft for. We often use all sorts of things for, which we modified into the role. They're all patches on the job. The Vigilante was in many ways a specialist for it, and a very good specialist. A very, very good specialist. See what I mean about being the aircraft which a 5-year-old would design? It really is. It's sort of all lines and... It's gorgeous. It is. It is a truly beautiful aircraft and something to go and see. If you're ever lucky enough to see one, I highly recommend it. They can be found at the Patuxent River Naval Air Museum in Maryland. They can be found at Midway Museum in San Diego, California, which I would really love to see someday. They're at the Naval Air Station in Nevada, I think. They've got one there, which you can go and see. I think there's one sitting at Orlando Sanford International Airport, apparently, in Florida. A lot of them were based in the Florida area. There's the one which I have managed to see, which was the National Naval Aviation Museum's one at Pensacola, which I believe had served on Nimitz. There is one in the New York State Aeroscience Museum, is it? Or Aerospace Museum? Let me check my notes. Aerospace Museum. Aeroscience Museum. Not Aerospace Museum. Aeroscience Museum. Most museums when they're aero are usually aerospace, but no, it's aeroscience. Okay. You be different, New York. You be you. There's also another one in California at Castle Air Museum. Castle, yes. And Naval Air Station, Florida, Key West, Florida, has its gate guards still, I think, is one of them. And then I've got notes, there's even one sitting in the Philippines. And there's a couple more in America, but I don't have notes on where they are for some reason. I should probably just go wiki that. But the thing is, they are gorgeous. They are worthwhile going to see, and they are something beautiful. And they're something really, really special. Honestly, I have regularly looked at this sort of aircraft and wondered why it hasn't been copied by science fiction writers, because... well, more than it was historically, because it literally lays its bombs as an egg mid-flight. So it could be cruising along at supersonic and still drop its bombs without causing any issues. The idea was you would lay the bombs out of the aircraft. I'll be showing you a drawing soon of this, and it is amazing. But I want to start by reading this section from the United States Naval Aircraft since 1911 by Stanborough and Bowers. The A5 had a high wing layout, low aspect ratio, swept wing being of the typical North American design. No ailerons were used. The wing had high blown flaps for low speed control and a combination of spoilers and the wing surface, all moving differential ailerons or tailplanes, and a slab fin rudder provided control in 3 axes. Another advanced feature was the use of variable geometry intakes for the 2 side-by-side General Electric YJ79 GE2 engines, for the first time in a production aircraft. And then they describe the linear bomb bay. Between the tailpipes of the engines, North America located a linear bomb bay, from which the A5's primary element, a free-falling nuclear weapon, was to be ejected rearwards. Part of the A5's fuel load was carried in 2 tanks attached to its weapon. Emptied before the target was reached, these tanks acted as aerodynamic stabilizers for the weapon as it fell. See, the thing is, it's a really gorgeous looking aircraft, and it's got this thing in it which it just sounds so weird. And I remember when I first saw a picture of this aircraft in its reconnaissance role, I thought, that's a really cool reconnaissance asset. And then I found out the backstory. And this aircraft became, for me, and I still think, one of the coolest aircraft that's ever flown. It's not as famous as it really should be. But the Vigilante is something which is special. And I would argue if America still had a capability like this in service, I would be ranking it alongside Hawkeye as one of the key advantages of having a catapult-assisted takeoff and barrier-assisted recovery carrier. That you can have this variety of aircraft. An aircraft which is designed, as heavy as this was, to be as fast, as maneuverable as this was. They scared the bejesus out of fighters on a fairly regular basis with how maneuverable and how fast they were. Fighters were going, yeah, we're the air defense escort. What the frigate? It's gone. And when it comes to reconnaissance, that was the other thing. They were in, they were out. There are aircraft lost during the Vietnam War, yes, but there's also a huge amount of information gathered. And one of the reasons why aircraft are lost is because, frankly, they are so useful they keep being used. I've used this discussion before when I've talked about the Tribal class destroyers and a few other classes. Sometimes something's so useful in a war, you keep using it. Which means it keeps going up against the enemy more times. And more times. And they only have to be lucky once. You have to be lucky every single time, in terms of the damage you take. And that's the problem. And that then gives us a skewed idea sometimes on the value of the pieces of equipment, of aircraft, of ships, of things. They go, oh, well, look at how many of these were lost. And you go, yeah. Look at how many missions they ran. Look at the odds on those missions. Look at how many missions they survived. Look at the fact that when they had a really highly dangerous mission, there was nothing else which it was considered even have a chance of succeeding, so they sent this. It's the only thing which had a chance. Anything else goes, they're in an even worse position. The US Navy for many years operated this. An aircraft which was the chance, which was the option, the capability. And when I say they operated this for many years, they flew from the Nimitz class. They flew from the Forrestals. They flew from everything in between. The list of carriers they served on is quite extensive. Forrestal, Saratoga, Ranger, Independence, Kitty Hawk, Constellation, Enterprise, America, John F. Kennedy, and as said, Nimitz, the first couple of Nimitz class as well. They were there when the US was sending their big, powerful carriers around the world in the 1970s, in the 1960s. These were the assets which were aboard them going, you're not going to get close. We're going to profile you. We're going to spot you. We're going to make sure we have all the information on you before you get anywhere nearby us. Because between 1961 and 1979, we are going to be the long-range hello. And they were useful for that. And what the other thing you have to think about, with especially with reconnaissance aircraft, is not just the value of the risks they're running and the odds of them getting shot down, but also the aircraft they save with the information they gather, the crew they save with the information they gather, the people, the forces they save with the information they gather, because they come back with that information. You go, right, there's an air defense site there, there's an air defense site there, there's an air defense site there, right, and so we can program in the suppression attacks of to go focus on these sites, take them out, and then the bombers can come in on the bomb run. And you've got all that information thanks to this aircraft charging through the aircraft area, not knowing where any of that is, and gathering that data. Quite literally, sometimes drawing fire for the purpose of revealing where the enemy are. That's cool. That's brave. That's the Vigilante. So, shameless book plug. So, these are always as much about me thanking you for supporting the channel as they are about me talking about my books. And the reason I'm talking about my books, I also admit, is because I'm a British academic, and promotion is pretty much based on publication, based on how well the books circulate. And whilst there are more books coming, I've had a bit of a fun time with more books, I have to say. The next round, they're all there. It's just it's getting the picture money together to buy the rights to the pictures to publish them. That's always the thing, and moving house and all the other things on top of that have not added to the cheapness of life. But thanks to you, I'm able to keep doing research, so I'm able to keep writing the books. It's just I can't publish them until I can put some pictures on them. It's really weird. I'm about 2 books in terms of completed, I'm happy with them. 1 book in terms of it's almost to the point I'll be happy with it, and another 4 books on research done, ready to write up for the primer series I'm producing of 45,000 word books. And not a single one can be published because they haven't got pictures for them yet. And I talked to someone who went, "Oh, why didn't you just publish them without pictures?" Or, something like that. And I go, "No." And there's even a few friends who go, "Well, there are ways to get round the picture rules." And I go, "Yes, there are. But the thing is, whilst there are certain organisations I wouldn't mind doing that to, because I would have no objection because of the way they run themselves, there are lots of organisations involved who own pictures who are very small museums or very small organisations for which I would hate to see that done, because they don't charge a lot, and if I accept the precedence of doing it to the big ones because I don't like them, then I'm creating a precedence for doing it to the small ones who I do like and I do want to keep going, who are literally just asking enough to keep themselves going. So I won't do that. Having morals is such a costly thing. Seriously, having any sense of ethics is so costly these days. It really is. But no, Tribals, Battles and Darings is my book. This channel pays for all my research, pays for my calyxes at the moment and everything else to store my books on. Thank you very much for all that and for making it all possible. And thank you very much for your support of watching the channel. And as I said before, I am trying to reach 15,000 subscribers by Christmas. I had my 5-year anniversary today. Literally, my 5-year anniversary flashed up on YouTube. And I went, oh, well, I'm not doing too badly. I'm quite happy with 5 years, what I've done in terms of producing videos that I like and all these things, and looking at the analytics and the sheer content, the sheer amount of videos I've produced, and trying to work out how many I've produced. In the end, I just gave up and went to the front of my channel page and went, how many videos? I'm nearly at 2,000 videos. Okay. Which means I've averaged more than 1 video a day over a 5-year period, pretty much. Because if we consider it's 365 days in a year, 5 times 360, 5 times 365 is, of course, 1,825, and I'm at 1.9k, so nearly 2k. So yes, just averaged more than 1 video a day for 5-year period. I might do a little bit too much, I'm not sure, but I'm enjoying them, and I hope you all enjoying them and finding them useful, and thank you again for all your support and making it all possible. So let's get back to the start of the Vigilante, and it starts with something called the Super Savage, which I haven't included a picture of because I might actually do a video about it at some point as a what might have been. Because the Super Savage, if it hadn't been for its Allison turboprops, is an aircraft which you could quite easily see becoming not just a strike bomber, but a anti-submarine warfare patrol aircraft, a Hawkeye, a Greyhound, i.e. a airborne early warning aircraft, and a carrier-on-board delivery aircraft, because look at its body form. Go and look it up if you want to see this. The Super Savage. It's a really, really cool-looking aircraft, and it's got theoretically great stats on paper. It's just the engines prove terrible. Atrocious in terms of reliability while being tested, and that causes issues. And when that fails, and they lose out realistically on that idea to Northrop, well, North American go, we've got to go better. We've got to produce a strike aircraft. And we're going to fund this ourselves. And this was the days when companies really did go off and fund their own projects still. Not like today, where they basically wait around for someone to go, we're going to foot the research bill and then buy oodles and oodles of them, so your shareholders are going to really make a lot of profit. No, it's a case in the days where companies would go, I see a need for speed. Let's build something that fills that need and charge $1. A lot of money. You up for that? Yep. Everyone good? And basically, they go, Super Savage has failed. Oh, right. What can we do next? Well, let's tackle the strike problem, because at the time, the US Navy wanted a strategic strike aircraft. It wanted something that would get them in the strategic bombing mission role, which would allow their carriers to stand off at impressively long ranges and deliver that strategic deterrent, and, if necessary, the strategic strike. And this is where the Vigilante comes in, because, oh my lord, are these the aircraft you want for that. Maximum speed, Mach 2. Mach 2. The ability to fly 974 nautical miles, that's over 1,100 miles, or 1,800 kilometers, to target and return, with their internal fuel as arranged previously, carrying up to 3 nuclear bombs. Yeah, that's a pretty scary aircraft. It has range, and it has the ability to do what you need it to do, to carry the weapons you need it to carry. That's not maybe a massive bomb load. Oh, you're only carrying 3 bombs. But yeah, they're B-43 thermonuclear weapons, so let's be honest. Quantity does have a bearing in life, but in this occasion, quality makes up for the lack of quantity. Quality really does make up for the differential. And they could do that range going fairly fast the whole way. Mach 2 is a good speed to have. A thrust-weight ratio of 0.72 is excellent to have. Now, one of the reasons why they had this was some of the design requirements, which included that they'd be able to take off from the deck of the carrier without it turning into the wind or any wind over the deck at all. So basically, the idea was, with just the assistance of the catapult and the carrier not even moving, because the moment the carrier starts to move, there's going to be airflow over the deck. That was a requirement. Requirement was also for high speed, high maneuverability. And yes, this is the bomb launching system. You have 2 fuel tanks, you have the nuclear warhead furthest in, and you have a drogue to pull it out. The external hardpoints allow you to carry the 2 more nuclear weapons, should you wish to, on external hardpoints, but let's be honest, the internal is going to give you the cleanest, highest speed, and highest ability to run, so it's worthwhile. But yes, this aircraft, which does look like a bit like the MiG-25, honestly, if you have a look at a MiG-25 from above, it really does look similar. If I produce the MiG-25 here, if you put the 2 next to each other, and I just do some things which you should never do with slides when you're live in a recording. You see, there is a similarity going on here. There is a similarity in shaping because, again, they are both designed for very high speed. They're designed around speed. One could argue, in fact, that the MiG-25 Foxbat here is designed as a response to the A5 Vigilante here, because basically all its specs are, we have to be able to catch that thing. And others like it, but that thing is the scariest and meanest of them, and the one which you're going to have the least idea of which direction it's going to come from, because it can be coming from a carrier anywhere in the world that is within 900 nautical miles of your coastline. That's a lot of the world. That is a lot of the world. But yeah, it's a good aircraft. It's not always the easiest to fly. It's not always without mishaps, and believe it or not, this system, sometimes when loaded, does come out on catapult launch. That whole thing about how violent launch and recovery is in a catapult system, yeah, this comes out. Contributed to at least one accident which caused the loss of an aircraft. Possibly a couple more accidents than that were caused by it. But at least one which caused loss of aircraft. But ultimately, it's not just the design which defines this aircraft, it's its career. And I always love this picture of them on the deck. There is nothing else which looks so futuristic and at the same time so old. I'm finding pictures and looking at the A5 Vigilante on decks. They really do. When they're looking at it, they look like the space fighters of your childhood. I just can't really describe it as anything different than that. That's what they are. And in terms of this look, on their performance as carrier aircraft, they did well. They were deployed on a lot of carriers for a reason. They were a very useful reconnaissance aircraft. And once they did get through the teething systems they had with their early technologies, and they did have teething systems because they were very advanced aircraft, and most of the technology was not mature, let's say. It was a case of, we have this bright idea, we have this great idea for a piece of technology. Great, let's try it out. It's not something we're really actually experiencing. One of the things I often describe to people with people when I'm talking about technology, when talking about its maturity, is it that the technology is not mature, or our understanding of it has not matured because we do not understand its limits as well as its advantages? Because limits is something you learn over time, realistically. You have the theoretical limits, but the practical, actual limits are often different than the theoretical ones. They're often far more defined. The theoretical ones are, this is how it will work in a perfect world scenario, according to the maths. Good. How does it work in a real world scenario? Well, then we have problems. The thing I find really cool, though, about the A5s in carrier service is that they survived the shift to submarine-launched ballistic missiles. There are so many aircraft in the strategic forces which, the moment they start talking about we're moving to ballistic missiles, we're moving to this, start to disappear. A5 doesn't, because, as I said, it has a use. The use is reconnaissance. They start off with the heavy attack squadrons. And they're good in that role for a while they're still being able to be used for that role. But when they come alive is when you have the RA5C variant coming into service. The RA5C is a gorgeous aircraft. By the way, this is the carrier they're arraigned on here is the USS Enterprise in 1962. You could not have a sexier photo than this, to my mind. I reckon the other aircraft in the picture, although they're seeing differing accounts of this, my guessing is this is an F8 Crusader. That's what it looks like to me from the back and from this picture. And I think the one at the top on the port catapult is a A5 Skyhawk. But that's just me. That is literally just me. And again, if we're going to talk about the career, we really do need to bring up what they do in Vietnam. We truly do need to bring up their Vietnam service, because that's where they get a lot of their working out. Again, they are in service from 1961 to 1979. A lot of that time is Vietnam. A lot of that time is Vietnam. But they're transferred early because from the heavy strike to reconnaissance. In fact, it's July 1963 when all the attack squadrons are transferred to the reconnaissance squadrons and change from VAH, or Heavy Attack Squadron, to RVAH, Reconnaissance Heavy Attack Squadron, if they need to. They're retaining the role and the capability, but it's not something they're going to be focused on. And as their reconnaissance aircraft, they have 10 squadrons set up. 10 squadrons of RA-5Cs established. And they're all grouped under Reconnaissance Attack Wing 1, which is a really fun organisation, but it's basically there to provide the US Navy's carriers with their reconnaissance assets, with their capabilities to actually go out around the world and go, let's see what you're doing, let's investigate. 8 of those 10 squadrons would serve over Vietnam, starting in August 1964. 18 would be lost in combat, 14 to AA fire. Remember what I said about them going in and revealing the positions of anti-aircraft units so that the other aircraft wouldn't have to. 3 to surface-to-air missiles. 1 to a MiG-21 during Operation Linebacker, which I personally feel rather sad about, and I feel is rather cruel that a MiG-21 managed to score that. But you can always get lucky if you're in the right place at the right time. A further 9 were lost to other operational issues with Task Force 77. And in fact, though, they were so useful that despite only having lost 27 aircraft, they ordered 36 with congressional support as replacements and attrition insurance to maintain the force structure, which is really cool and shows how valuable the aircraft was. However, Congress giveth and Congress take away, because they ordered those 36 additional aircraft to be built in 1968 to 1970, but also in 1968 they start their policy of chasing the RA-5Cs, the Vigilantes, around the country, closing their bases. Every time they get settled, every time they get set up quite happily, they seem to close their base. The first thing is Naval Air Station Stanford in Florida. They move them from there. Then they turn them to Turner Air Force Base, which they get to rename as Naval Station Albany. And then in 1974, that is closed, and they are moved to Naval Air Station Key West, Florida. At this point, I'm not sure. I think possibly a congressman from Florida gets involved and goes, if you chase these aircraft anymore, you're going to have me to deal with, because I don't want to lose those jobs. Probably after having a conversation with a congressman from Albany and a congressman from Sanford, etc., they had just kept moving around. They had kept moving around, and it's not good for them. It's not good for the aircraft, it's not good for the crews, it's not good for the personnel involved to keep having to move. Not just moving individuals, you're moving an entire squadrons. You're moving all their engineering set, all their expensive maintenance equipment. All those things have to be moved so you can still support these aircraft at the new base. The thing that really starts to do for them in terms of their services, as useful as they are, air wings have to average about 90 aircraft in late Cold War, mid to late Cold War. And as I've talked before many times, above 90 aircraft, you start to have problems in terms of the humans being able to keep track of all the mechanical bits and all the squidgy organic bits, and things start to build up and cause trouble. If you have 90 aircraft, it's difficult to manage. More than 90 aircraft is very, very difficult to manage. And there have been studies done into this, and there's always someone who comes up with a theory of, if we had this system, we can study, we can do more. And the Americans tried those studies. They did, extensively. They kept trying different studies, and they kept coming back to the same thing of, the study doesn't make an absolute jot of difference. It moves the margin maybe to 91, 92, 93. Best study I think scored in 96, effectively running. But that doesn't really help things much. And you've got the F-14, you've got the S-3 Viking, these big heavy aircraft, the heavy air defense aircraft, you've got the long-range anti-submarine aircraft, and you've got to start looking at your air group, and you've got to decide what's going to go. What's got to go? And that's a scary thing to be put in a situation of, but in the end, the Vigilante is what goes, because for the US Navy, they can attach reconnaissance pods onto F-14s and other aircraft. The F-8 Crusader, which I talked about in the last key aircraft video. We can do all that. We don't need to therefore have a specific aircraft for the role, as good as it is, as useful as it is. And those are airframes we don't need to carry. We can avoid carrying 5, 6 of these airframes and can instead focus those airframes on other assets. And that's one less set of stores you have to carry, so you can carry more of the other aircraft type stores, so you can operate them more efficiently. An aircraft which is quite so useful, quite so exceptional, is done for ultimately because as a single-purpose aircraft, there is only so much space you can justify. And in this way, the US Navy, in many ways, is learning the same lesson which the Royal Navy had learnt prior to World War II. The reason why we have the Swordfish torpedo spotter reconnaissance aircraft. Why is it called a TSR? Simple. Because you don't want to be carrying torpedo aircraft, spotter aircraft, and reconnaissance aircraft. Better you carry one set of airframes which do all 3 jobs. And you start maxing out, you start working out which jobs fit together. The British tried for a fighter dive bomber. Doesn't really work because the Skua is far more dive bomber than it is fighter. Which is a sad thing, but it's also a very, very good dive bomber when it's used in that role. It's very accurate. But for the Americans at this point, well, if you can have 90 aircraft aboard a ship, and you have got, let's say, you divide them up into 5 different sort of 18 groups of 5, then the maximum you can generate for any operation, if you need to do that mission, is 5 aircraft. But if you are carrying 90 aircraft, and let's say you have got 54 aircraft, which are general purpose aircraft, which can do reconnaissance, can do strike, can do air defense. Maybe not as well as the specialist can, but well enough. Well, you've got a choice there. I can have 5 aircraft which are 100%, and if I lose one, then I'm out, or then I'm down 20% of my force. Or I can have 54 aircraft which are, let's say, 80% solutions. And if I lose one, I'm down to 53. It's not even 2% of my air group total. I can probably still generate the same amount of force overall. That's the maths which does for the RA5C Vigilante. Not its capability to its job, not its usefulness. It's the maths of how many aircraft can you carry aboard a carrier, and how can you fit it together. How can you make these things work? With that being said, let's consider the successors. The thing about reconnaissance and information gathering is that as soon as the Americans got rid of the specialist aircraft and started using other aircraft in the role, including converted Avort F-8s, which they basically converted into a reconnaissance aircraft to fill in some of the role. i.e. sort of creating specialists to fulfill for a specialist they've got rid of, but the F8 took up less space. The Americans have felt the absence of it. You could argue that a lot of the work into the X-47B and a few other things like that was to recapture some of the reconnaissance capability they had lost. Some of the information gathering they've lost from their carriers, because it used to be that the carriers were these very potent tools, and there were numerous times in the Vigilante's career where it was used as a deterrence methodology. An overflight of a Vigilante or a couple of Vigilantes were used rather like Buccaneers were used by the Royal Navy. They overfly an area? Yeah, there's a carrier within range. Are you sure you want to be doing the action you're doing? Are you sure about that? No? Good. For those who might have just realised, yes, there is the fluffy research assistant has been down there the entire time. Just been asleep the whole time. Like he is most days, when he's not being distracted by fireworks. Which is kind of the methodology used when you're doing an overflight. It's kind of similar to fireworks and the effect on dogs. Dogs look up and go, oh, there's all these explosions going on. What do I do? What do I do? And they get worried and stressed. It's the same if you are, let's say, a dictator of a country planning to take over another country. And you go, what just flew in my head? Oh. And sometimes you do it very cleverly. You might go, oh, don't worry, they're not going to fly over your country. They're just going to fly along the border in our allies' country. And you know, and we know, and people operating the aircraft know, that they can get pretty good images from their systems and their very, very cool radar suite of what's going on your side of the border without ever crossing it. And there is nothing you can do about it other than declare war on the United States. And do you really want to do that? In that way, reconnaissance aircraft were for a carrier, especially as reconnaissance aircraft were not supposed to officially be deployed. Well, as a rule, were not deployed armed because they're supposed to be going in as fast as they can and getting out as fast as they can. Well, they sort of become like the carrier's presence system, in that the carrier has presence, but it expands its presence by going, look, we're over here, we're over here, we're over here. And again, losing that was a blow. And you have seen the Super Hornet have reconnaissance capabilities added onto it. The F-35 has had reconnaissance capabilities added onto it, and all these aircraft are trying to fill in for that role. For the British, this is advantageous because the F-35B has come with capabilities which, whilst they had some on the Harriers, was never as good as they would like them to have been. But for the US Navy, there still is this limitation. These aircraft are good. They are fine fighter aircraft. They are fine strike aircraft. But reconnaissance is not their primary role. It's not what they're there for. It's not what they can do. You wake up and you start woofing. And honestly, they don't look as pretty either. Because that is one sexy beast of an aircraft. It truly is. So let's consider the summary. The A5 Vigilante starts off as this strategic strike weapon, this nuclear bomber, and that was its purpose, to be the strike asset, to be the capability for the US Navy to be part of the strategic conversation, be part of the strike packages that were being arranged in the 1950s. Be part of the picture, because everything was about nuclear warfare, everyone was about dropping the bombs, everything was about that, and if you weren't in that, then you didn't matter. This is also the same period where the US Army starts pursuing the idea of nuclear artillery, which is a useful thing, let's be honest, but not something I prefer to use. I prefer to avoid to have nuclear tube artillery firing or firing on my behalf. They set records. They really did. In 1960, they set an altitude record. It didn't last forever, but they actually set it doing the most scary and stupid thing you can possibly imagine. In that they flew an A3J variant of the Vigilante, carrying 1,000 kilos to an altitude of 91,450 feet. That's 27.87 kilometers above the Earth. And they did it, and this record would hold for 13 years, but I'm not surprised it held because of the way they did it by going up to a speed of Mach 2.1, pulling up to create a ballistic trajectory, as you do, and going beyond the altitude at which the wings could actually function. So the engines flamed out in the atmosphere, it got so high, and the aircraft actually rolled on its back. And because the pilots knew this was coming, because they'd experienced it on some previous flights, they simply released the controls as the aircraft plummets back to Earth, and wait for the aircraft to retain control naturally as it came back into the lower atmosphere. I know there are people who claim that test pilots are not built differently than other human beings, but I'm fairly sure they are either missing or compensating for something, because intentionally taking my aircraft up into an area of the Earth's atmosphere where I know the controls will not work, just for a world record, does not attract me in any way, shape, or form. But I have absolute faith that Leroy Heath and Larry Munro were absolutely exceptional at their jobs. I also have faith that I would never get in a car driven by either of them. At all. Under any circumstances. But they were really good aircraft. And they were really useful aircraft. And I finished these videos with a question, and I've not been sure what question I'm going to ask for this video. I love this aircraft so much, it's such a cool piece of history, but I think the question really comes down to this. The other option, I suppose you could have done, instead of making the Tomcat, the F-14, which I also absolutely adore, get its tactical airborne reconnaissance pod system to help it do the reconnaissance role. Modified the Vigilante to be an interceptor and carry it as your interceptor aircraft. There is some issues. The F-14 is probably the better option in that role, I would argue, but I suppose this would be a way of retaining the reconnaissance capability. The F-14 does have more external stalls and has a very big, sexy radar and all sorts of things. But, you know, I suppose that's the other question. And what happens if they go the other way? Or what happens? Actually, no. I think the question that should be asked is, if you were going to design a reconnaissance aircraft for the role today, what would you be looking for in its capabilities? For medium altitude reconnaissance. And medium altitude means you go in low, you try and be as possible, and then you pop up to get as wide a field of view as you can to some medium altitude, and you dive down again, you get out. That's usually how they conduct these things during most of the career of the Vigilante. I'd be interested to see what you think. What have we got coming? Next week we have two historians. It's me and Drac having a long talk about the Royal Navy that could have been. And that's kicking off, hopefully, a two historian series. If I can actually get everyone to tie themselves down for dates, and I can stop hearing discussions about, yes, but if I do a video on YouTube, is that giving away the milk for free? I've now heard that from 4 different British academics, so I'm not sure who is putting that round as a document and who is using that phrase, but that's very much a phrase I associate with the American political debates, not UK discussions in British universities about whether or not to do a video on YouTube with a friend. But that's just a personal rant. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed and take care.